So let's start translate. Here's the demand schedule we had for lattes before. But now we're going to also put this in a curve format. So key thing when we're drawing our demand curves, quantity goes on the x-axis. And you know, like all the notes, you should be putting this demand curve in your notes. Right? Quantity goes on the x-axis, quantity of lattes. Price goes on the y-axis. That is always going to hold. We're always going to have quantity on the x-axis, price on the y-axis. Now, here it's given for you. If you're doing this from scratch, one of the first things you need to do is figure out how far, what kind of number coordinates do we want on each axis, right? Well, the quantity demanded, you're going to start at 0, but the highest point is 16. So you could see that's right about here on the graph. And for price, start at 0, goes up to 6. We're good with that as well. So what we end up seeing here is going from $0 to $6, 0 to 16 units, and you can start plotting points in. So at 0, 16 units, quantity of latte demanded is 16, right? Helen wants 16 lattes if it's free. If it's $1, she wants 14. If it's $2, she wants 12. If it's $3, she wants to buy 10 units. $4, she wants to buy 8 units. And in your notes, when you're doing this, you should be plotting these points along here, right? You should be going $4, finding the point where it's at $4 and 8 units, and then you plot the point right up here. $5, she would have 6 units, right? $5, 6 units, and you plot the point. Finally, $6, it's the highest price point we have on our schedule. Whoops, let me go back. There we go. $6 is the highest price point that we have. At $6, Helen demands 4 units. This is our demand curve. In your notes, when you plot out a demand curve also, and when we do some on the board later, I'll be showing this as well, but you should put a D next to the demand curve. Plot the demand curve, put a D next to it. It just helps keep it sorted when you put in a demand. Later we'll be putting a supply curve in. As you might guess, we label the supply curve with an S. So this is the demand curve. All the exact same information is on the curve as in the chart. It's just the curve is graphically represented. Now, what we just looked at was a demand curve for Helen only, right? This is Helen's demand schedule and demand curve. As mentioned, we could look at the market demand, and all you do is take the sum of the quantities demanded at each price and add it together. So here, as a very simple example, suppose you just have 2 people, only Helen and Ken, who are the only 2 buyers in the latte market. So at the various prices, we know what Helen's demand schedule was. Here's Ken's demand schedule. So then you get a market quantity demanded, right? If they're free, Helen wants 16 lattes, Ken wants 8. At $1, Helen wants 14, Ken wants 7. So we get 16 plus 8 is 24, 14 plus 7 is 21. Price of $2, 18 total, all the way down. Right, it's just the sum. And if you have 100 people, it's done the exact same way, right? 100 people, they'll, at a price of $1, Helen wants 14, Ken wants 7, and the other 98 people want however many lattes they want. That is the market quantity demanded if the price is $1. So it's all the same, just kind of the construction of this. I think this is relatively straightforward, right? The market demand is the sum of the individual demand for all consumers. But it does relate, right? This market demand that will be coming doesn't come out of thin air. It is based on the demand you see for individuals. So we have the demand by looking at the market, right? The market quantity demanded versus the price. That's a demand schedule, right? Price, quantity demanded for the market, put in a chart or table format. That's a demand schedule, which means we could graph that on a demand curve. So the market demand curve for latte in our little 2-person only world looks like this. Once again, quantity on the x-axis, price on the y-axis, demand curve. Just plot each individual point out. you've got it. So, with these demand curves, do they satisfy the law of demand, right? We said that we've got this law of demand. Law of demand. As price increases, the quantity one is willing to purchase decreases. We say it's a law, so really, because we say it's a law, it better hold. So what do we have here? Well, for Helen's individual schedule, as the price increases, the quantity of lattes Helen wants drops. Makes a lot of sense, satisfies our law of demand. Because the law of demand holds, what we expect for our demand curves is that they will be downward sloping. As you drop the price, the quantity demanded will fall. So price goes from 6 to 5, as you drop the price, the quantity demanded increases, right? Drop from 6 to 5, the quantity goes from 4 to 6. So as the quantity is increasing, the price is dropping, or as the price is increasing, the quantity is dropping. The demand curve is sloped downward. So as long as the law of demand holds, our demand curves will be downward sloping. As the price drops, we'll see a higher quantity, or as the price increases, we'll see a lower quantity. We saw that with Helen's individual demand curve. And for the market demand curve, we see the same thing. As the price drops, the quantity demanded increases. A quick technical point here. When the price changes, does demand change? The answer to this is no. Demand represents the entire demand curve, or an entire demand schedule, right? Demand schedule is just the same as the demand curve, only the demand curve is the graph, the demand schedule is the chart. When the price changes, it doesn't affect the curve itself. So we'd say demand does not change. What does change is the quantity demanded. So going back to the graph we just had up, if the price goes from $5 to $3, the demand doesn't change. Demand is this entire curve, right? We're going to, in your notes, you should label a D next to this for demand. That entire curve doesn't change, which means demand doesn't change. What does change, if you go from 3 to 5, the quantity demanded goes from 15 to 9. So if the price changes, we don't say that demand changes. What we would say is the quantity that's demanded changes. And it might seem like this is nitpicky, but the demand curve has the quantity demanded for all various prices. If we don't differentiate this, we run into some issues once we throw the supply curve in there as well. So it is important, even though this might seem like it's a kind of a nitpicking point, when the price changes, the quantity demanded changes, not the demand curve itself. Now, the demand curve itself can change. So the demand curve itself, if something other than price is affecting demand, then the demand curve itself changes. And what you would see is demand changes by shifting to the left or to the right. This is a decrease in demand or an increase in demand. We would call this a change in demand, right? If it's just the price, it's not a change in demand. But if something other than price affects demand, then you see the demand curve itself will change. So what else can affect demand? A lot of things, right? Income is one of them. If you make more money, do you think you'll buy more of a product? Often, many of you probably will nod, yeah, if I make more money, I'll buy more of a product. Well, for a lot of products, that's probably true. But, so the products that it's true of we'll call normal. But there are probably some products that this is not the case. And these are called inferior products. So I'd ask you to think, is there anything you buy now that once you start to make more money, you won't buy anymore? All right, are there any products you buy now that once you start to make more money, you won't buy anymore? Two most common things that I get is two most common responses I hear are ramen noodles right? Ramen is really cheap. So because it's really cheap, it's popular among college students. Second one was like generic brands or cheaper versions of a product. If you are of legal age and you're buying beer, if you're in college still, you may be buying the least expensive beer that's available. Once you get out of college, start to make a little bit more money, though, you might stop buying cheap beer, not buy cheap beer as often. If so, then you'd say that cheap beer is an inferior good, or ramen noodles are an inferior good. As your income went up, you bought fewer of them. Most goods, though, are normal goods. As you make more money, you'd buy more of the product, or at least you wouldn't drop your consumption of the various products. So those are what we call normal products. What else affects demand? Well, the number of buyers, right? The more people who are willing to buy, might consider buying a product, the greater the demand. It's relatively straightforward, but certainly has a big impact. If you are, once again, let's go to Domino's. The demand for Domino's pizza changes dramatically between when school is in session, or when Susquehanna University is in session, and when it's not in session. When Susquehanna University is not in session, that's far fewer people who might be willing to buy Domino's pizza, right? Demand drops dramatically. Tastes and preferences, right? People, there are various fads for products. Things go in and out of style. Tastes and preferences matter. Expectations for the future can matter. Prices for related goods can also matter. So for prices for related goods, let's think through, there's a couple ways this could matter. One is if the products are substitutes. What do we mean by substitutes? Well, the two products could substitute for each other. For video game systems, like the Wii U versus a PlayStation 3, or versus an Xbox 360. Those products all kind of do the same thing. They're substitutes. For food products, right? Maybe water versus soda versus beer, or hamburgers and hot dogs might be substitutes, right? Anytime you consider one product or another product, products are substitutes. Various, the fast food restaurants all serve stuff that's kind of substitutable, right? You could go to McDonald's for your supper, or you could go to Taco Bell, right? The products are substitutes. Well, if a related good price changes and it's a substitute, if the price of the substitutable product decreases, say demand shifts to the left. So this is a decrease in demand. So with the decrease in the price of a substitutable product, demand shifts to the left. Let's say you are looking at a video game system and you're thinking, well, I think I'm going to buy the PlayStation 3. Well, if a week before you're about to buy the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360 drops dramatically in price, you might reconsider, right? With the decrease in the price of a substitutable product, your demand for the PlayStation 3 may have dropped. So demand curve, we would say it would shift to the left. That a shift to the left shows a decrease in the demand for a product. For complements, with the decrease in the price of a complementary product, demand shifts to the right. If you like, let's say you make games, video games for the PlayStation 3. Well, that's clearly a complement for the video game system, right? It goes together with the system. Peanut butter and jelly, those are complements, right? They often go together. Well, if the price of peanut butter drops dramatically, you might see people buy more peanut butter, right? We would expect people to buy more peanut butter based on our law of demand. But because peanut butter goes with jelly, we would also expect people to buy more jelly as well. So if the price of a complementary product drops, your demand would increase. If the price of peanut butter drops, the demand for jelly will increase. And if it increases, the shift is to the right. If demand decreases, the shift is to the left. So for an increase in demand, we're just going to show what would happen here. At every single price, people would demand more of the product. So we would have an entirely new demand curve that has been shifted to the right, right? The demand at $6, the quantity demanded used to be 6. Now it's up to, let's see here, price of 6. Doesn't really show, but it's at about 11, right? Doesn't show it the new one exactly. It doesn't have the dotted line now, but it looks like it's about 11. When the price was 5, it used to be 9. Now it is, yeah, it's at about 14. Yeah, it says over here by 5 in the example, and it does seem to match up. At any given price, the new quantity demanded is higher. So when would this happen? Well, if you get more income in the product as a normal good, as we said, your demand would shift this way. If the price of a complementary product drops, it would shift this way. If there's more buyers in the market, the demand would shift this way. The other way that demand could shift is a decrease in demand, and that's just the opposite effect, right? You just move the other direction. You would have a shift, and it would go to the left instead. So when you have a shift in demand, the entire demand curve changes. It could either go to the right, as in this example, or it could go to the left. Key fact for you to keep in mind is knowing the difference between a movement along the demand curve, which is just when price changes, and a shift in the demand curve is going to be crucial. A part of it is we're about to shift over to looking at supply. Once we shift over to looking at supply, you have to know when one curve is affected versus the other curve being affected. When is there a movement in one curve versus a shift in the other, or shift in one, movement in the other? You have to start to learn how the terms for shift versus movement. Otherwise, it gets a little bit messy once you start to throw both the demand and the supply curve in on the same graph, which we will be doing pretty shortly.